is consumer America? How are we into the retail sales report next week?
Well, the interesting thing is that consumers continue to complain about life. They're very concerned about inflation, particularly high food and energy prices. They're saying that interest rates are too high. It's impacting their ability to buy homes. And they're also more concerned about geopolitics and the state of Washington. So with all of that, consumers are saying they're concerned about their future finances and incomes and even job availability.
I love that we're going to have a segment about feelings ahead of the feeling survey that we get out, the University of Michigan sentiment survey that we get out at 10 a.m. How closely related are people's feelings with their doings, with what they actually are buying?
Well, the interesting thing is that when we look at current conditions, consumers are still purchasing things, but they're putting it on their credit cards. Just earlier this week, we received data from the New York Fed that shows that credit card use is still up, it's rising, and also so are delinquencies. And delinquencies for credit cards, auto loans, and even other loans are now slightly above the 2019 level. So consumers have run out of that excess savings, especially at the lower end of the income spectrum, and they're shifting to very expensive debt to finance their purchases.
Is there some correlation historically between a downturn in sentiment and a recession and the labor market and some of these other indicators that are more closely followed by people at the Fed and beyond?
Well, if you look at the Consumer Confidence Index, it almost never tells you what's going to happen with consumption in the GDP NIPA data. But it does give you a sense of how consumers are feeling. And if they start worrying about the future, especially jobs and business conditions, it oftentimes presages something negative. Now, we do have a new indicator in our Consumer Confidence survey, and we asked them outright, do you expect a recession at some point over the next 12 months? Now, those expectations have eased, but it's still 69% of consumers say that there is going to be a recession.
Well, let me go right there, Dana. I think that's really, really valid. In all the work you did, all the economic history you did at Wesleyan, which leads on economic history, is there any ability to pick and call a recession?
Well, we do have our leading indicator, and it's usually pretty good at signaling recessions. Now, it's been negative for 18 months, and it's been signaling recession for quite some time. But the thing is that it doesn't have much in the way of services. And we know services spending has been very strong, and that's a product of the shifting in demand post-pandemic, less on goods, more on services. And so it may not be telling the entire story. So we're definitely watching other measures of services.
Absolutely brilliant. And the basic idea here, folks, and this is important, and a question to Dana Peterson, is that, okay, if it's a services America, and it's a kind of services America which we really don't understand it, can we actually utilize Friedman from, come on, Dana, Friedman could be your great-grandfather. Can we utilize Friedman from 1950 whatever on long invariable lags? Can we actually have that conceit?
Well, I think long and variable lags are very relevant. When we look at monetary policy, it hits the economy at different points in time. So higher interest rates have definitely subdued the housing market. And I think when we look at the GDP data from the third quarter, businesses are getting bitten by the higher cost of capital. Now, the next thing is consumers. And certainly in our survey, as I said, they are complaining about higher interest rates. And certainly that's going to start affecting consumers when they have to start paying those elevated credit bills at those very high interest rates.
How political are people's feelings?
Well, we don't ask them like, how do you feel, politically, but we do ask them what they're worried about. And more of them are saying they're concerned about geopolitics and also what's going on in Washington. But we really should look to what happens in elections to get a good sense of how consumers feel. And we just had one this past week.
Well, the reason why I ask this is because there have been a number of surveys showing big divides in the sentiment among different voters based on specific issues and how they're being portrayed in certain circles. I'm just wondering whether that's become a more polarizing factor in some of these sentiment surveys in recent years, or whether it's always been that way.
Well, when you look at one of our competitors, they actually do ask people about how they feel by political party. And it's usually the case that whatever party's in power, those folks usually feel better than the other party if they're depending upon their political affiliation. So it's not really a great measure because if your guy's in the White House, then you feel good about it.